Okay, the recording has started. And I'm going to turn the webinar over to Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year, about 3 weeks in. I hope you are all doing well. There we go. We have several items to discuss today. I'm hoping that it will not take the full time. So the first discussion will be around digital literacy specialist resources, and Chuck Klinger will be taking care of that. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over.
Can you advance the slide, Amanda? Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Christine. And thanks for accommodating my schedule. I have to jump out of here at about 11:15, so that's why they're coming right to me. So the first thing I just want to talk about is, and we previewed this at the administrator kickoff, but we had developed content for a checklist of skills or competencies for digital literacy specialists at the programs. It was in a really rough draft form at that point. We did share a better draft version with the digital literacy specialists that we've worked with in November or December, I think it was. This is another a further draft, so this is probably a little different than what we'd shared with the digital literacy specialists, and I believe they're working on a final version that's gone through all of the rigor that it needs to go through before it's an official document. But this just gives you a little opportunity to see what the content looks like. And these are more areas that we feel the digital literacy specialists should be able to address within your program. And we've identified baseline competencies, which are typically things that have more to do with their own ability or with diagnosing problems or diagnosing where your agency's at, staff are at, students are at. And then competencies that are more proficient. So if your digital literacy specialist is, has the proficiency, so if you can check all of the right hand items, then you're probably not going to need help from us. So I think that the role with our project is first and foremost to get all of the digital literacy specialists to at least the baseline competencies, and then ideally to work towards having them be proficient in all of the areas that they need to be in. So just a real quick rundown of where they are, of what they are. The first thing that we address are the digital literacy skills, and we've looked at digital literacy skills in terms of learning management systems, being able to work with a learning management system, working with webinar platforms, and that's whatever webinar platform most of these are going to be specific to your agency. Office productivity, usually it's going to be Microsoft Office, but some people use OpenOffice or other types of programs, but working with a word processor, spreadsheet, PowerPoint presentation sort of a thing. And then file and document sharing. And whether you're using Dropbox, whether you're using Google Suite, Google Drive, or some other way of sharing documents, but it seems like those are probably the 4 areas that most educational agencies should probably be using to work with their students and to kind of manage their programs. So really just making sure that you have somebody on staff that can kind of speak to all 4 of those areas for your program. The next 2 rows have to do with digital literacy needs. The first one is addressing staff digital literacy needs, and the second one is addressing student digital literacy needs. I'm sure you can imagine there are some subtle and maybe some not so subtle differences in what your students need for digital literacy as opposed to your staff. So we've kind of identified those. And really the baseline competencies have to do with, being able to assess or diagnose what those needs are within your agency. And then the right where people are proficient is when they're actually able to address those needs. So one of the first things we want to be able to do is make sure that the digital literacy specialists are able to identify what the needs of your program are. Even if they can't address those needs yet, then they can work with us, and that gives us a good avenue to work with your program to address those needs, and then to work with a digital literacy specialist so that they can begin to address those needs themselves. The next row has to do with technology integration. And the baseline competency has to do with basically being able to substitute. So being able to run your classes the same way you always do, or manage your program the way you always do. But just starting to substitute technology for what you're currently doing. People started doing remote classes, so that's a really good example of that during the pandemic. And then to be proficient is hopefully they'll be able to start to see how they can enhance your program or improve your program using technology. And I think, again, with the remote classes, a lot of agencies have discovered, hey, this is a really good way for us to improve our enrollment, our retention. We can get our students more hours and things like that. So that's another thing that we want to work with them on. The next row has to do with technology in the workplace. And the first thing we want them to understand is just basically what are the digital literacy skills for career readiness? Just what are general, somebody who's looking for a job, what are some just general digital literacy skills that are needed? And then as they become more proficient, they start to identify in your area for the jobs that your students are going to be getting, what digital literacy skills do they need for those types of jobs? And so that's something that we'll work with people on in conjunction with Kaylin and Chrissy and Loretta's projects as well. We're almost done. Accessibility is the next one. And when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about two things: accessibility to technology, and then using technology to improve accessibility to education and to other types of things for your students. So working with your students on having access to the technology, and then how your agency can use technology to improve your student access. So it's kind of like two ways of looking at that. The next one is digital citizenship, and thinking about how your agency, how your teachers, how your students manage information. Are they being ethical in how they work with information? Are they able to determine fact from opinion and things like that? And can they support students and teachers in doing those things? And then also, of course, when you think of digital citizenship, how are other people seeing you based on your digital footprint? And are you doing things that are offensive or that might harm their age, a teacher's reputation, your agency's reputation, a student's reputation, things like that. And then the last one has to do with distance education and, understanding the modalities that your program's using. So hopefully the digital literacy specialists can kind of speak to all the different ways that you're using distance education, whether it's supplemental, whether it's remote classes, whether it's high flex classes, and also how you're preparing students for distance learning. What are you doing in intake? What are you doing in orientation? What kind of instructional support do your students need? And then also how you're maximizing the use of distance learning and, hopefully providing engaging remote classes. So those are kind of, in a nutshell, those are kind of the things that we're looking at developing in the digital literacy specialists. So the other thing that I just wanted to mention briefly are just some of the things that we're doing. We are having monthly meetings with the digital literacy specialists. We've been actually using this competency checklist as kind of like looking at different areas for each meeting. So I believe the meeting in February, I think it is actually going to be the one with technology in the workplace. We also did a survey, and thanks to those of you that disseminated the survey to your digital literacy specialists, we had a really good response to that, and we did share the results. But the areas that people most identified as something that they're probably going to want help with is identifying the digital literacy skills for local employers, and then addressing digital literacy needs of staff and students. Those are probably the two areas that we heard most, that people at least wanted ideas or to talk about. So those are the things that we're focusing on right now. We're also developing resources. You've hopefully seen the digital literacy skills for students that are part of the PA Foundation skills. There will soon be a document available that will be digital literacy competencies for educators. And those are also documents that will be working with the digital literacy specialist and anybody else that wants, that wants help in using those particular documents. And for the digital literacy skills for students, we're working on kind of like a comprehensive list for each of the skills we've identified of resources that you can share with students or teachers to share with students, that will help support each of the digital literacy skills that we've identified. So that's what we're doing with this in a nutshell. Hopefully this all made sense. Um, I don't know if anybody has any questions, or Christine, if you have anything you wanted to add, or Amanda.
No, thank you very much, Chuck. That was very informative. I'm sure people, if they don't have questions now, will have questions at some point. Chuck can stay with us for another 3 minutes. So if anybody has questions for him, please, you can unmute yourself to ask, or I'll check the chat. Patrick asked, where do we find this checklist? So Chuck has a draft available that he's been sharing with the digital literacy specialists, but because it's still in draft, it's not posted yet. So Patrick, if you'd like a copy of the draft, go ahead and contact Chuck. And Kathy says, hi, Chuck.
Hi, Kathy.
Do we have any other questions for Chuck before he
Christine, this is Kelly. Can you hear me?
I can.
I don't have a question, just sort of a comment. First of all, Chuck, thank you so much. That's very helpful. It made a lot of sense, and I appreciate that, the work that's gone into this. And I know this is brand new. The digital literacy specialist is a new thing. But I'm wondering if at some point down the road, there could be a third column on that shows evidence. Like, what does that look like in a program? Because we all have a different idea of maximizing. We have a different idea of using. So maybe just some ideas at some point in time of what evidence you might have in a program to show that your digital literacy specialist is doing those things. So just a thought.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and it's something that we will work on. And I think it's something too that I think we'll want to get input from, and maybe administrators as well as the digital literacy specialists on. Some of it I think will be contextual. Like different agencies will probably have different needs in different areas. It's one of the things with digital literacy is just such a broad field. It's just something. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. So thanks.
We have a couple more questions in the chat. I've got 1 minute of Chuck left. Is there a huge difference between the digital literacy specialist using Google Docs and Office Docs as far as employability for students?
I don't think so. I think that would be more specific to the employer. And so I think that's a good example of knowing the employers in your, in your area. I would think and it would be interesting. I'd also be curious to see if Chrissy or Kaylin has any opinions on that. But I feel like in our area, most employers probably would be more office, because I don't think that they're as worried about collaborative type work for the students that we're placing into jobs. So it's more being able to work with a spreadsheet individually, like, if that makes sense. But that's just off the top of my head.
And then Mercedes wants to know, what are the, Mercedes, maybe you could unmute yourself. What do you mean by other worksheets? Mercedes, can you unmute yourself and ask that question and answer?
If it helps, the digital literacy skills for students is available on the PA Adult Ed Resources website now. It's part of the PA Foundation skills. So that's kind of like the larger document that they're housed under. And the digital literacy competencies and their competencies, we've
Oh,
kind of made those similar to the adult teacher competencies. They should be available.
no. So those are with me. Those have to go through a document approval process here at PDE. So I can't say when that will be available. The checklist will be available soonish, but the teacher competencies will take a little more time.
Yep.
All right, Chuck, you're at time. I know you have to run. Thank you so much for meeting with us this morning. And I'm going to ask Amanda to take the share back.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
And before Amanda moves on with the agenda, several people have joined after we started, and I just want to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded. And so anything you put in the chat, anything you say on your mic, or if your camera is on, that's all part of the recording. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. And thank you. I guess Chuck is gone, but thanks to Chuck for all of that work around the digital literacy specialist role. So next, I know that very often the webinars that I hold are me telling you about things that you're supposed to be doing or things that aren't going well and all that kind of stuff. So we're halfway through our program year, and it feels like maybe this is the first year in a couple of years where things aren't quite as chaotic as they've been since March of 2020. And so we're definitely seeing in many programs improvement in enrollment and retention. And so I wanted to take some time to give kudos to some programs who are showing really strong work this year under various grants. And so I asked the advisors to kind of discuss it and look at things. And this is all based on data from the Access template, which was updated yesterday morning. And by us, we used an updated Access template yesterday morning. So it basically includes data that have been entered in eData as of the end of 1/17, unless you have very early morning staff members who happen to enter data very early yesterday morning. So what we looked at is agencies that met all three of these criteria. So they're or under a grant. So they're at 65% of contracted enrollment or higher. And those students have 50 or more average hours of instruction so far this year. And at least 40% of those students have a pre and post test match. So we're looking at programs that are enrolling people and also retaining them and assessing them at appropriate times. So here are the list of agencies. So in the 064 grant, we have several sub-grantees as well as some direct grantees. So congratulations to Employment Skills Center, Goodwill of Southwestern Pennsylvania, Lancaster Lebanon IU 13, Northampton Community College, and the Literacy Center. Under the 061 grant, which is the Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grants, congratulations to Lancaster Lebanon IU 13 and Northampton Community College. And finally, for Family Literacy 054 grants, congratulations to New World Association, Project of Easton, and Vita Education Services for achieving these kind of thresholds that, you know, we thought this is showing some really great progress in this year, where we're really hoping to see recovery in enrollment numbers and in measurable skill gains and in student persistence. So congratulations to all of those. congratulations to others of you who are showing increased enrollment and retention and post-testing and outcomes as well. So we, those programs all have 65% or more enrollment. Some of them are actually very close to exceeding or meeting, I'll say, meeting their contracted enrollment. Some of the programs who were not on that list, maybe because their students don't have retention, are also close to meeting enrollment numbers. So I wanted to stress that with this grant cycle, we have removed from the guidelines the wording that said that you shouldn't over-enroll, right? Back in the 2000s, so 2008, 2009, and such, we did have situations where programs brought in lots and lots of students, but it was because there was churn, there was student churn, so students were barely staying 12, 15 hours. They weren't being post-tested, they left, and so the program brought in new students. And what we said is you really need to focus on bringing in students who are ready to participate in your programs and working with them to get outcomes instead of just bringing lots of bodies into seats. And we introduced kind of that wording that you shouldn't over-enroll. But I think we're beyond that now. I think all of you recognize the fact that the goal isn't just to get bodies in seats, but it is to have people come in and to be able to work with them to help them reach their outcomes. So we have removed the wording. What I'll say is, I don't know that we penalized anyone for over-enrolling, but there is no penalty. We're not going to yell at you. We're not going to say, why are you enrolling more students? So it is okay to quote unquote exceed your contracted enrollment. And we're not going to penalize you if you do that. There is also no kind of automatic reward for enrolling more students than you're contracted for, right? That in and of itself is not necessarily considered a good thing if the reason you can enroll so many people is you have so many people dropping out before they're getting their outcomes. So, if you are enrolling students, are those students persisting in your program? Are they achieving their goals? Those are kind of the important things to think about. So it is okay to, if you have the capacity to serve more people than you're contracted for, and you're able to keep them in the program and work with them, help them meet their needs, achieve their goals, hopefully in the process also meeting our outcomes, that's fine. Now, like I said, there's not an automatic reward for serving more people. And so kind of the goal is that, if you have a few more people that you can serve, that you would do it with your existing funds. However, we have been hearing some cases where there is a sudden, pretty abrupt, not a pretty sharp increase in a group of individuals who have kind of a specific need kind of right now that maybe you couldn't anticipate. There are two examples on the slide. Those are the two that people have mentioned to us. Those are not necessarily the only examples, but so you may have a situation where there's increased refugee resettlement in your area. The two populations that we're hearing about are Ukrainian refugees and Afghani refugees. So, or sometimes there's a large employer closure. You're part of the Trade Act or rapid response, and you're looking at large numbers of individuals who are going to be dislocated workers, and those individuals are many of them could benefit from our programming in order to be able to take advantage of training funds that will be available to them, things like that. So there may be cases where it's a large group of individuals with maybe a concentrated need for a specific period of time that you're just not able to address with your current resources. So we will consider requests for additional funds to serve these individuals. If you are experiencing that, it's just not a call that says, hey, we have a refugee resettlement agency that said that they're going to have a whole bunch of people coming in over the next 6 months, so we're going to need more money, right? We really need to have a concrete plan. What is your plan to provide the needed services? How many individuals are you looking at? What is the period of time that they're going to be coming in? Are they coming in all together at the same time? Or are they going to be kind of coming in slowly over the next 12 months? If they're coming in over the next 12 months, then, do these individuals have very specific needs and they would benefit from having a focused, managed enrollment class where you can focus on intensity of instruction and address their specific language needs that might not be met in your general classes. So, the concrete plan, how many people are you going to serve? How will you meet the needs of this population? What are their needs? What is the proposed class schedule, content, location? Who is going to teach it? We're hearing from many of you that you're struggling to find teachers for your existing classes. Well, if you're having a hard time finding teachers for your existing class, are you going to be able to find someone to teach this additional class or provide these additional services? So we'll definitely consider requests for additional funding, but you have to come to us with a very concrete plan about what that is going to look like. It is a fairly arduous process to do what is called a funding adjustment. And last year we did some funding adjustments so people could request additional funding related to assessment. And then what ended up happening is many of those agencies ended up returning some of those funds to us in their final expenditure reports. And so that's just more work for everyone on both ends. So we really want to have a good concrete plan about what's needed. Obviously, if you're requesting more funds, you'll have kind of the description of the plan, and then it would need to include a budget that would tell us how you're intending to use those funds. The other thing to keep in mind is this would be a one-time increase. So if you do a funding adjustment this year to serve a certain population that you had not anticipated when you originally got the grant, it does not mean you're going to get more money next year, right? This would be saying, okay, there's this sudden intense need. Now, we can look at it again next year if that need continues. But I need you to understand that, if you get an extra $30,000-$40,000 to provide a very focused set of services for this population, that you're not necessarily going to get that money next year or in future years. I don't see chat or anything like that. So are there any questions or comments so far, Christine?
There are no questions in the chat. If anyone has a question about this for Amanda, you can certainly unmute and ask, or if you want to ask your question privately, you can always email your advisor.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anything, Amanda.
Okay, I'll go move along then. This is just a reminder for you all that for the 22-23 grants, and this would apply to all of them except I guess the IELCE grants, the 061 grants, which were continuation. all of the rest of the grants this year was a competition, or for state leadership, you have a contract every year. Once the grants have gone through the full approval process, so they're out of our office, my boss, the bureau director, has signed off on them, and they are in the workflow step will be something along the lines of AFLA review complete, ABLE review complete, something along those lines, and the status is marked completed. That is to let you know everything has been done, and there should be a fully executed contract uploaded into eGrants for your agency to have for your records. So this is kind of what it will look like in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see something that says workflow step, AFLA review complete, status completed. And then when you go into that particular grant, there's a section called reporting guidelines and final reporting. And if you click on the final reporting, there should be a PDF of your fully executed contract, just to let you know. Now, we did get a question from someone who noticed that there's something called the awarded status. And some of the family literacy ones say substantially approved. The adult education ones, as long as they've moved past me, say approved. That is just something that's in the system. Some larger institutions like to know if something's substantially approved or not, because they feel comfortable beginning to expend funds when it says substantially approved. When the grants were moved to you, so we had the competition, we did the peer review, and we awarded grants. And then once we made that decision, the grants were moved back to you to make some corrections, and then to have your signatory formally submit with signature. When I did that step from moving it from peer review back to you to make changes, I marked the majority of them substantially approved. Some of them were conditionally approved because there were changes to the dollar amount, but most of them were substantially approved. When everything was okay, and I was getting ready to pass them into the rest of the system, in the adult education grant, there was the option to change that status to approved. For some reason, there was not that option in the family literacy grant. So if you have a family literacy grant and you notice it says substantially approved and not approved, that's just because for some reason eGrants wouldn't let me mark it approved. That does not have any impact whatsoever on whether or not the grant is fully executed and you're going to get your money. As long as you see something that says AFLA review complete and completed, and the fully executed contract is in there, you're good to go. So we had gotten a question from someone about what that substantially approved meant. And it's initially, while it's going through the approval process with us, it means that we're basically okay with the content of the grant, but you still have to make some corrections. When possible, once we're okay with everything, I mark it to change it to approved, but I was unable to do that with the family literacy grants this year. Okay. These are just a couple additional reminders and some clarification. Just wanted to remind you all that within the grant are some assurances, which are part of your contract, that said that you have read the most current guidelines and policies. And I will say that from reviewing the grants and the way some of the questions were answered and information was entered, it appeared that people had not, in fact, been reading the guidelines and the policies. So just please make sure that you always read the guidelines and the policies. I know that the advisors truly appreciate, when you contact them and you say, on page such and such in the guidelines, or in this section of the guidelines, it says this, and I have a question about it. That's very helpful for the advisors because they know that you have the context and then they can then answer the question. That's a very specific question. So please make sure you read the guidelines, or if you have a question, make sure you look in the guidelines and policies prior to just emailing your advisor and saying, what do I do for this? Because they may just say, well, read policy D100, and then please come back to me with a more specific question. And for those of you who do that, thank you very much. And what I'll say is we did make some pretty significant additions, I think, and a few changes to the guidelines for the competition. So please sit down and look at those. Regarding supplemental distance learning time, as a reminder that attendance, those hours or minutes must be entered within 14 days as all data are entered. There is a conversion chart of minutes to decimals to support data entry on the PA Adult Education Resources webpage under eData Manual Glossary Help Docs. So for those of you who need reports about especially the federal grants or any of our grants for auditing purposes, as a reminder, you can get those reports in the FAI system. Every once in a while, I still get a request for me to send that information, and those reports were built into the FAI system to make that readily available to grantees without having to come to PDE for that information. So that's just a reminder. If your auditors request those, you can pull those from the FAI system for them. And this was another question that kind of came up. One of the programs was looking in eData and saw that we have that new tab that was added in eData at the end of last year for additional measurable skill gain options and post-secondary credential for very specific populations. And they asked about whether the nurse aide credential or certificate should be reported in the post-secondary credential if the people were participating in adult education at the same time as they were doing nurse aide training. And the answer is no, because the nurse aide credential and certificate is not a post-secondary credential. It is a PDE's Bureau of Career and Technical Education determines like enrollment into training, who can enroll, and the age is 16, and there is no high school diploma or high school equivalency requirement to participate in the training or to take the test, and as a result, it is not considered post-secondary. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you can't support individuals who are within nurse aide training. That by no means am I saying it. I'm just saying that you don't need to worry about trying to enter that into eData as a post-secondary credential. It is still, obviously it is still an outcome that is important to your students, and it is meaningful to them, and it's excellent if they get it. It would be wonderful if you have it documented in the student files. If it's their individual student outcome, there is a way to enter that in eData, but you are not required to, or you should not report it in this one particular section because we cannot report it as a post-secondary credential. So related to PSI, which is the entity that purchased the HiSET exam from ETS, there are ongoing challenges in that transition. It seems to be predominantly with paper-based. It's not just in Pennsylvania, it is nationwide. They're supposedly working on it We are communicating with our legal office and our procurement to kind of formally express our displeasure with certain aspects of the transition and to ask them how they're going to fix things. The other kind of challenge related to this is that there were problems with the transfer of data related to the HiSET test from PSI to Diploma Sender, which is the vendor that we use to maintain our records. There were missing, so there were test results that were missing in that transfer. In some cases, scores from historical tests were coming over incorrectly, so it was showing up in Diploma Sender as someone who had already passed, in fact, did not have a passing score because the passing scores were not coming over correctly. In some cases, tests were being duplicated, and so it looked like a person had taken more tests than they were allowed to take in a calendar year. There are also some security issues. As part of their contract with Pennsylvania, Diploma Sender has to guarantee that there will be pretty high levels of security around data transfer because it's, PII. There are issues with how PSI was transferring the data. It was not meeting those security requirements. So as a result of all of those issues, Diploma Sender has suspended all imports of HiSET data from PSI until those issues can be resolved. Unfortunately, what that means for students who are taking the HiSET is even if the scores are showing up in PSI, it's not coming into Diploma Sender, and the credential will not be issued until that can be resolved. So I did want to let you all know that if you have students who are kind of wondering what's going on, they've completed the HiSET. It's apparently showing up correctly in PSI, which maybe, which is good news because there were a lot of issues with that, but they're not hearing anything from Diploma Sender. That is why. It's because there have been issues with that transfer of data happening fully, correctly, accurately, and securely. And Diploma Sender is working with them to get it resolved. At this point, it's pretty much up with in PSI's court to get everything addressed to the point that Diploma Sender can start that import again. And finally, this is just a little bit of clarification. So with this grant cycle, we are saying that all staff must spend 2% of their time on professional development activities related to their jobs. And there were some questions around what is considered professional development for the purposes of meeting this. And it's, the first 4 bullets, it needs to be job embedded, and it can include the courses, individual coaching or technical assistance, and participation in your professional learning communities. It's not attending webinars. This webinar is not professional development. The Friday morning webinars are not professional development. It's information, it's useful, but it's not job embedded professional development. PACE is a wonderful activity, but it is not professional development for the purpose of meeting the 2% of time. Participation in your program improvement team, I think, would also not be considered professional development. That participation in the professional learning communities definitely is. Christine, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you covered everything.
This is Tim. Can I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So like if teachers that are certified, they can get Act 48 credit through PACE. So even though they're able to get Act 48 credits for PACE, it still doesn't count as adult education PD time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And could you just explain that a little bit in terms of why something like a conference like PACE or COABE would not count as professional development?
It's not job embedded. You know, the professional development that we encourage is job embedded professional development.
Okay. And then how does that need to be documented, the PD?
However,
If at
I mean,
all.
I can't tell you how to document, you know, you have your own documentation systems for, you know, people's time and however you document that. I mean, how have you documented it in the past?
Yeah, okay. Through my learning plan for
Yeah,
us.
I mean, what I would say is, courses that are done through our portal. I mean, I think Christine does in our portal
Yes.
document that, and if it's facilitated, the facilitators would know it. I think aren't there like certificates or something when people
Yes.
complete the modules? Individual coaching or technical assistance, there would obviously be documentation that that's happening. Participation in the PLCs, I'm sure have some kind of record that the staff are doing that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, can I ask you a question back? Because I got an email from someone asking me about Act 48, about me giving them Act 48 credit for PACE because PACE wasn't giving it. Is that incorrect information?
Yeah, PACE never provides the Act 48. We usually go through TIU 11 and they provide the Act 48 credit.
Okay.
And I'm not 100% sure if it's IU 11 that's providing it this year, but we always have that option available.
Okay. All right. So it was just confusion then. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Christine, this is Tina Swinford.
Hi, Tina.
I've received Act 48 at PACE, but you had to pay like an additional $10 for it to be processed.
Okay.
So I mean, I didn't go to PACE recently, but it may have changed, but that's how it was in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, the fee is for the processing fee. So that would go to TIU 11 to be able to process the Act 48.
Yeah, and you have to document which sessions you went to, and you have to do your survey and give feedback, and just like you would for any other Act 48 credit worthy professional development.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do we have questions about anything else that Amanda covered today?
A couple of things that I didn't put on slides, but I did want to remember to say. I guess I assume many of you have heard that Dr. Khalid Moomin is our acting Secretary of Education. He comes directly from, I think it's Upper Merion School District, and prior to that, he was at the Reading School District. I have not yet met him, but so we do have a new secretary, or at least acting secretary, until he is confirmed by the legislature. And then the other thing I wanted to let everyone know is that the next two webinars, February and March, February 16th and March 16th, the advisors are working with some programs to do presentations on best practices around two main topics. So the February webinar is going to be on using oral and listening assessments for ESL students effectively. And the March webinar is going to be on successful program improvement team meetings. At this point, I don't know that I will be doing any presentations, so these may be good webinars for additional staff to participate in if you would like them to.
We do have a question in the chat regarding agency mandated safety training, and does that count as PD?
No.
You know, no.
It has to be job related. Yeah, I mean, at the state, we do probably 20 to 30 hours of those type of trainings every year. And no, they're not professional development for our purposes. And as a reminder for that, if there are charges for that, if your grant is charged for that, that does need to be reported in 2,300 as an administrative cost.
360, Amanda? Is it 2,300,
Yes.
360?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't mean staff time doing it. I mean, like, I know sometimes in some agencies, there's an actual charge for however that training is provided. There's a like per staff member charge or something like that. You don't need to worry about the staff time doing it. That can be at their regular time. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. And have a wonderful next couple of weeks, and we'll talk to you in February. Thank you.